Watch Pope Leo XIV walk into almost any room, and there's a young man a few steps behind him. He's not a cardinal, he's not a bodyguard, he carries a folder, or nothing at all. When the cameras swing toward the Pope, this man drifts to the edge of the frame, and then out of it entirely. Most people watching have never once wondered who he is. But here's the strange thing. That quiet figure standing just off to the side may spend more hours next to Leo than anyone else alive. He's there in the morning before the meetings start. He's there at night after the last visitor leaves. He hears things no journalist will ever hear, sees a version of the Pope the world never gets to see, and then says almost nothing about any of it. So who is he? Why did Pope Leo, out of the entire Catholic Church, choose this particular man to stand that close? And what does a papal secretary actually do once the doors shut and the microphones are gone? His name is Edgard Iván Rimaycuna Inga. He's a priest from Chiclayo, a city on the northern coast of Peru, and he is the personal secretary to the Pope. He was born in 1989, which makes him barely in his mid-30s, and if you passed him on the street, you'd never guess that this is one of the people closest to the man who leads more than 1 billion Catholics. He grew up in La Victoria, a working-class district of Chiclayo. Not a place that produces men who stand next to popes, and that matters because it makes the whole arc almost absurd when you lay it flat. A boy from a modest neighborhood in northern Peru, thousands of miles and an entire world away from Rome, ends up as the shadow of the man in white. Nothing about where he started pointed here, and that's the first thing you have to understand about the job. It isn't a job of power, at least not the kind you can point to. Rimaycuna doesn't run a Vatican department, he doesn't sign decrees, he can't appoint a bishop or overrule a cardinal. On the official organizational chart of the Catholic Church, he barely registers. What he has instead is proximity. He is in the room. And in a life as guarded and scheduled and observed as a pope's, being in the room is its own kind of rare access, one that only a handful of people in the world will ever hold. He describes the work simply. He's there to help Leo with the daily grind, and just as much to protect the time and the rest and the peace the Pope needs to actually carry the weight of the office. Vatican programs list him among the small circle of people who travel with the Pope, who accompany him, who stay close. 4 men, roughly, form the inner ring around Leo's daily life. Rimaycuna is one of them. But before we get into what the job actually involves, there's a question worth sitting with. Why him? Why would a brand new Pope, suddenly responsible for the entire Church, reach past every seasoned Vatican insider and keep a relatively young priest from Peru at his side? To answer that, you have to go back almost 20 years, long before anyone imagined a Pope named Leo. Go back to 2006. Rimaycuna was a seminarian, studying philosophy and theology at the Santo Toribio de Mogrovejo Seminary in Chiclayo. That same year, during a study trip to Rome, he crossed paths with an American Augustinian named Robert Prevost. At the time, Prevost was the head of the Augustinian order worldwide. He was not famous, he was not a cardinal, he was a priest with a heavy travel schedule and a reputation for being calm and easy to talk to. Neither of them had any reason to think that meeting mattered. Then the paths kept crossing. Prevost's work brought him again and again into contact with the church in Peru, a country he'd already served in for years as a missionary, and in 2015, everything tightened. Prevost was made Bishop of Chiclayo, Rimaycuna's own city, the same streets, the same cathedral, the same local church. As bishop, brought the younger priest in close. He made him a parochial vicar at the Cathedral of Chiclayo. So for years, Rimaycuna wasn't watching from a distance. He was working under him, day to day, in an ordinary diocese far from Rome, back when Robert was just the bishop everyone in town knew by name. Think about what that means now. When Leo looks over and sees Rimaycuna, he isn't seeing a Vatican functionary assigned to him after the election. He's seeing someone who knew him before the white cassock, before the crowds, before people rose to their feet every time he entered a room. He knew Pope Leo before there was a Pope Leo, and the connection didn't stay in Peru. In 2017, Rimaycuna moved to Rome to keep studying, this time at the Pontifical Biblical Institute, one of the most demanding schools of Scripture in the Catholic world. He earned a specialization in the Bible. He was a serious student, not just a friendly face from back home. Here's a detail that says a lot about how these threads connect. Years later, at a Vatican audience, Pope Leo pointed out that the priest sitting right beside him had once received a scholarship from the Papal Foundation, an American charity that helps students from poorer countries study in Rome. In one small aside, the Pope turned his own quiet secretary into a living example of something bigger. Support the Church gives to an unknown seminarian from northern Peru, and 2 decades later, that same man is helping carry the daily life of the papacy. You rarely get to see the payoff of that kind of investment. Leo made everyone in the room see it. And here's something easy to overlook in all of this. This is a man who could have had a completely different life. He's a trained biblical scholar, with a specialization from one of the most respected scripture schools in the world. That's the kind of background that leads to a professor's chair, to books, to lectures, to a name in academic circles. He had the mind and the credentials to become someone the Church points to. Instead, he chose to carry a schedule and guard a door and disappear from the frame. Whatever ambition a career like that could have fed, he traded it for a job whose entire point is to not be seen. Keep that in mind, because it's the same choice showing up again and again. So the story keeps climbing. A bright seminarian in Chiclayo, a parish priest in his own hometown, a scripture student in Rome. Then, in 2023, Provost is called back to Rome himself, this time as a cardinal running the office that helps choose the world's bishops. And who does he bring on as his secretary in that office? Rimaycuna. The following year, 2024, it's official. The bond that started in a Peruvian seminary is now operating inside the Roman Curia, at the level where the future leadership of the Church gets shaped. And then May 2025, white smoke. Robert Provost walks out onto the balcony as Pope Leo XIV, and within days, on the 11th of May, the man who'd known him through all of it becomes the personal secretary to the Pope. Nobody planned that. Neither of them, back in 2006, could have drawn a line from that first handshake in Rome to this. It just moved, quietly, one step closer to the center, year after year, until one day the center is exactly where it ended up. Now back to the question we left open. What does a papal secretary actually do all day? Strip away the mystery, and a lot of it sounds almost ordinary. He helps organize the Pope's schedule. He handles correspondence, the flood of letters and documents that come at a Pope from every direction. He helps prepare for meetings and for trips. He makes sure the right papers are in the right hands at the right moment. But the more interesting part of the job is the part you can't put on a task list. He guards the Pope's rest. He protects the small windows of prayer and silence in a day that everyone in the world wants a piece of. He absorbs interruptions so they don't reach Leo. He's present in sensitive moments, difficult conversations, private meetings, and then he carries what he saw and heard without repeating a word of it. A pope is surrounded constantly by demands and requests and people who need something. Part of Rimaycuna's job is to keep a pocket of calm around a man who otherwise gets almost none. And think about the discretion that takes, day after day. He hears the Pope's unguarded thoughts. He sees him tired, worried, human, in moments no one else witnesses. He's in the room for conversations that could shake the Church if a single line leaked. And his entire professional life is built on the discipline of saying nothing. No memoir, no anonymous quotes slipped to reporters. He never trades a secret for a moment of feeling important. In an age where everyone seems to be recording and posting and telling, this is a man whose whole value rests on his silence. That's harder than it sounds. Most people can't hold a good story for a week. He holds them for a lifetime. And it's worth being clear about what this is not. Rimaycuna doesn't control who gets to see the Pope in some gatekeeping power broker sense. He doesn't set policy. His influence, whatever influence he has, comes from trust and closeness and knowing when to stay quiet, not from any title on a door. He'll tell you himself, his job is to help Leo and to protect him, so the Pope can do his own work in peace. That's the whole of it, and that's not how the role has always played out. History is full of papal secretaries who became powerful in their own right, and some who became famous. Think of the man who stood beside Pope Benedict XVI for years, Archbishop George Genswein. Tall, striking, always in shot, so recognizable that Italian magazines put him on their covers and treated him like a celebrity. The secretary became a public figure in his own right. it happens. When you're that close to the center, the temptation to become someone, to trade proximity for a name, is real. Rimaycuna went the exact opposite direction. He had every chance to lean into the attention, and instead he keeps stepping out of it. When a Peruvian priest suddenly stands next to the most watched man on earth, the easy path is to enjoy the reflected spotlight. He chose to be forgotten, and once you notice that choice, you start to see everything about him differently. Which brings us to the line that really opens up who this man is. He said plainly that nobody teaches you how to be the Pope's secretary. There's no course for it, no training program. The assignment just arrives, suddenly, and you're standing next to the most watched man in the Catholic world with no manual. So he had to look somewhere for a model of how to do it, and where he looked tells you everything. He looked at Saint Joseph, the husband of Mary, the guardian of Jesus, and in all four Gospels, a man who never speaks a single recorded word, not one line. Joseph's entire life happened in the background, precisely so that Mary and Jesus could be in the foreground. His strength was silence. His whole vocation was to protect and provide, and then step out of the frame. And he looked at John the Baptist, the one who spent his life pointing away from himself, towards someone greater coming after him. John said it directly, "It is fitting that I decrease and that he increase. Less of me, more of him." Sit with that for a second, because that's the paradox at the heart of this whole story. Rimaycuna's own measure of success is that you don't notice him. The better he does his job, the more invisible he becomes. If he ever becomes the story, he's failed. A man whose entire ambition is to shrink so that another man can be seen. In a world where almost everyone is trying to be noticed, that's a strange and quietly radical way to spend your life. And it reframes that figure standing stiffly behind the Pope. He's not there because he's important. He's there to make sure someone else can be. There's another thing Rimaycuna has said that stays with you. He knew Robert Prevost the bishop, and now he serves Leo the Pope, and people naturally ask him, has he changed? Being elected Pope is about the biggest change a human life can undergo, and his answer is no, he hasn't changed. He's the same man from Peru, with the same calm and the same patience, still the person who actually listens when you talk to him. What changed, Rimaycuna says, is the clothing and the responsibility. The person underneath is the one he's known for years. Think about how rare that is, and how much it might matter to Leo. A pope is surrounded by people who only ever knew him as pope, who stand when he enters, who weigh every word he says, who can't quite see the ordinary man anymore. And then there's one person nearby who remembers him from Chiclayo, who remembers the bishop before the conclave, the priest before the crowds. That's not just staff, that's a thread back to who you were before the whole world started watching. It might be one of the few genuinely honest relationships a pope gets to keep. Now, don't picture this man as some grave, joyless shadow. There's a very human side to him, and one moment let it slip out in public. In November 2025, the Italian singer Laura Pausini came to the Vatican for a private audience with Pope Leo. Leo, it turns out, has been a fan of her music for decades, going back to the early 90s. But during the meeting, he told her something that clearly delighted him. "My secretary," he said, "is your biggest fan, if not in the whole world, then at least in all of Latin America." And just like that, the silent priest in the background had a personality. A guy from Peru who grew up on Laura Pausini songs, who probably never dreamed the Pope himself would one day introduce him to her. It's a tiny thing. But it reminds you that the figure standing behind the Pope is a real person in his 30s, with the same music and memories and small joys as anyone else. He just spends his working life keeping all of that out of view. At some point, the Church made his role a little more official. Leo named him a chaplain of His Holiness, which gives him the title of Monsignor and formally places him inside the papal household. Now that title didn't make him a bishop. It didn't hand him power over anything. What it did was put a public stamp on what was already true. This is the Pope's trusted man, and his service to the household is recognized. It was less a promotion than an acknowledgement. A way of saying, on the record, that the quiet priest at Leo's side belongs there. So let's go back to where we started. The young man a few steps behind the Pope, drifting out of the frame every time the cameras turn. Now you know why he's so easy to miss. Being missed is the assignment. He's there before the meeting starts and after the photographers pack up. He organizes the day, guards the silence, protects the rest, and carries 1,000 things he'll never repeat. And through all of it, he remembers the man from Chiclayo, who existed long before the world learned to call him Holy Father. That's the real weight of the job, and it has almost nothing to do with paperwork. A pope carries something enormous. The hopes, the grief, the demands of more than 1 billion people, all pressing on one human being who still has to sleep and pray and get up and do it again. The person standing closest to him isn't there to share that spotlight. He's there to make sure the weight of it doesn't crush the man standing inside it. So next time you see Pope Leo walk into a room, look just past his shoulder. Find the young priest at the edge of the frame, the one about to disappear. Now you know his name, and you know a little of what it costs to live your whole vocation just outside the picture. Had you ever even noticed him standing there? And what surprised you most about the life this man actually lives? Tell me in the comments. If this gave you a new way of seeing the people around the Pope, subscribe and stay with us, because there are more of these hidden figures than you'd think, and every one of them has a story like this waiting underneath. He spends his life making sure the world looks at someone else. Maybe, just this once, it's worth looking at him.